Hello everyone and welcome back to another Getting Stuff Painted, my bi-weekly update, give or take, on the various miniatures I've been painting for the games we cover here on the channel. And as we steadily approach 100 of these, not quite there yet, I think this is like 95, 96, something like that. Almost 100 since I've started this tabletop channel. I'm pretty sure in all that time I've never said, and may never say again, the sentence I'm about to say to you, which is, this time around I've mostly been painting scenery. Hence the hodgepodge. Everything kind of strewn on the table because it's awkward to try and line them up. There is some miniatures to talk about. We've got some Battletech, we've got some Warhammer Underworlds, and technically some Warhammer Age of Sigmar slash Warcry, which also ties into a lot of the scenery we're talking about. But it is the scenery that took up most of my time, barring Yawn. I forgot about Yawn right there, smack dab in the middle of the camera, giant snake from the Resident Evil board game. But it did take up my time. So that's mostly what we're going to talk about, because I did actually try a different painting method that I've never tried before. I keep on wanting to call it Zenith painting, but I believe it's called Zenithal. So we'll talk about that in a second, but you know, let's actually just go over the little miniatures first, talk about Yawn, and I'll save the scenery for last because I'll move stuff out of the way so we can clear the table and take a proper look. So as a matter of note, I have painted up an Atlas from Battletech. Instead of doing the one from the starter box, which needs to be done in the Northwind Highlander colours, I decided to do the one I got from a blind box in my own colours, because I think I remember mentioning I found one in the MechWarrior 5 video game, so I was like, oh, that's how my colour scheme would look on one of them. I'll adapt that to the miniature, and I'm happy with how it turned out. I like the Atlas. I know some people don't like the Atlas. It's kind of, if you like the Atlas, chances are you probably don't like the Urban Mech, and then vice versa. Very rarely there's people who like both. For the record, I like both. If you want mechs that I don't like, the Orion. I don't like the Orion. I don't know, it doesn't look good to me. But I've talked about the colours I use for my particular my particular mercenary company before. It's mostly Aethermatic blue with a little bit of Talassar blue, and then just silver and the Gracier with a wash on top. Super simple, very nice though. Oh, and the Yandin yellow for missile ports and things like that. Love the mech. Still got another one to paint up, and that one will be much more basic because the Northwind Highlander colours are pretty simple, barring the tartan they have on their legs and shoulders. But got that done, so I'm going to pop that off to one side. It might just about visible, so we're making room from technically Age of Sigmar, but I got it for Warcry. It is a Banshee, I think it's called. I honestly can't remember what she's classed as, but combining this with some Night Haunts, I believe it was, or maybe it was the Curse City stuff. Either way, this helps just to bring up the points to the 1,000 required to run a warband in Warcry, and it was pretty cheap. So I picked it up. It was also a nice chance to try and do some ghostly techniques on her dress. Her under armour is, it's the, not Garget, Skewer, the other one, Rattling Grime on top of silver. I wanted to see how that looked. I actually quite like the look. I'm not sure how well it's going to pick up on camera with the way the lighting is today. That's the problem with recording these as it gets into the winter months. Scotland do be dark this time of year. A mixture of Gloomhaven, whatever, it's all not Gloomhaven, it's something like that. One of the texture paints for painting ghosts in one coat, not a contrast paint. On top of that, with a little bit of Biotan green, and then a dry brushing of Oathway Grey, I believe it's called. Her hair is just Gryph-hound orange, and then non-oil over everything. I was also using her base as a test for any and all future Night Haunts I may paint up for Warcry, and I decided to do the technique that I did. Oh, I didn't realise that some of it's actually peeled off. That's weird. Look at that. I wonder how that's... I genuinely don't know how that's happened. Oh, I know what's happened. I forgot to go around the outside of the base in black. I totally forgot. I'm like, why does this not look right to me? There we go. That goes to show that I've been painting way too many things. I forgot to paint the outer rim in black. Well, as I was saying, the base, now that I've noticed it's not complete, I was testing things to do with Night Haunts in the future, because I like Night Haunts, and I would like more of them, rather than just using the Headsman's Curse for Warcry, although that takes up like half the point value, which is handy, because again, those two games cross over really well together. So I did what I did for the vampires, which was use the Storm Fiend, I think it's called, blue, one of the newer contrast paints, on top of concrete, whatever it's called, concrete by the AK texture paint systems. I talked about the Plague World one last time, or the time before, when talking about painting up the Wormspat. They also do just a flat concrete colour. I applied that because she just has an untextured base, just a flat grey base, and it's a very, very bright grey. It doesn't look concrete colour to me. Maybe before, well, mixing concrete, sure, but not dried concrete. But it does just a nice simple texture that you can go over with basically any colour. So I just went over it with the Stormfiend blue, got that effect, and then I was like, you know, I have all these autumnal leaves that I got for, I think this was for Shadowland, Daredevil and Elektra for Crisis Protocols, where I used them just to try and make them look a bit like how the official paint shops had similar looking things on their bases. I thought it looks like she's kind of flowing into the wind a little bit, so it might be neat. My only problem with the autumn leaves effects is that it doesn't really match the dark cut. It constantly struggles to keep this in focus. It doesn't match the darkness of the blue. Really, there would be some shading on the leaves to match it up. I didn't want to risk that, so I'm just leaving it as is for now, but subject to change on any future night haunts. And now that I've realised I've forgotten something on this model, I'll of course be fixing that at the next opportunity I get. So, speaking of Warhammer Underworld, kind of indirectly, we have Domitan's Storm Coven, the man himself in the middle, and then Leona and it begins with an S, but I don't remember what it is. Painted in the exact same colours as I painted Farstrider's Warband, which I covered about 3 or 4 videos ago now, so I don't need to really go over again how I'm painting Stormcast Eternals. It's the exact same method. The only difference here is for Domitan himself, he's kind of making rocks levitate, so I just added a little bit of Aethermatic Blue, not Aethermatic Blue, sorry, Frostheart Blue contrast paint beneath the rocks to make it look like they're being raised by kind of like magical energy. I actually really like this model, and I like the concept of the Warband as well, just focusing on lightning magic, although I don't think they've had a great time of it from my experience using them so far. They don't do well against warbands who can take a hit, is my experience. So then we have Leona, she's kind of just floating along, gliding along with rocks flying below her. They're also very kind of like cocky, as like all the quotes on the cards for them are very smug, which is quite fun because they're basking in their lightning powers essentially. Hopefully that is in focus. She has a weird white mask on, I don't know why, just matching up the official paint job there as well. But very fun warband, and I'm still okay with how I paint up Stormcast. It's a way I'll stick with should I paint any more in the future. It also means I don't need to use just Nazdrag by itself, because I'm very much in the I don't like Nazdrag yellow anymore camp still, although I did use it on some of the scenery we'll talk about. But it doesn't look good enough for what I'm after, but the method I use here makes it plausible to look better. And it's all thanks to the Necron compound, or whatever it's called, the Necron dust, the texture, the dry brushed paint from Citadel. That's basically the magic thing right here with none all over the top. But anyway, as I say, go watch the video where I painted up the Farstriders, which was a little bit ago now, for a full rundown of the colours used there. And does the dog want a ball throwing? Yes, she does. So we're already up to the last non-bit of scenery I have to talk about, and it's Yon from Resident Evil the board game, who might have a little bit of trouble focusing just because it's sticking out so far, or its head is anyway, from its base. Very fun model, very detailed. Like, you can see the detail of each individual scale, and that is very impressive, and it's just an absolute dream come true for when you're wanting to paint something with contrast paint. Militarum green is the primary green used here, and then while it was damp I mixed in a little bit of Skeletal Horde on its underbelly, or where the scales are lighter on a snake. And then it was, I think it was non-oil on him, Agrat's shade on the base, I think. As for the weird like pustules he's got on him, they change colour based on which version of Yon you look at. He looks very diseased in the original PS1 game. The GameCube remake is slightly different, and in the PC version of the GameCube remake the colour is slightly different again. So I just kind of made them Wildwood, just to make them look like weird cancerous growths. You could make them look like slimy or orange, like not orange, pinkish purple. If you had one of the other like light purple contrast paints, you could make them look kind of bruised, which might be quite nice. And a little bit of Skeletal Horde for his fangs. Inside his mouth is Volupus Pink, and some blood for the Blood God. He do be spraying poison at poor Richard's face. So that is the first boss painted up for the Resident Evil board game. I'm actually in the process, as well, not as I'm recording this, but sitting on the table waiting for painting the second boss for the board game, which is Neptune the Shark. And then honestly, just like 2 missions later, you've got to paint up the third and final expansion boss. So that is Plant 42, which is, honestly, I think it's actually, like, the base is probably the same size as Yawns, but it's so much larger. So that'll be an undertaking. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to tackle Plant 42 yet, but that is a problem for future me. And I'm not future me yet, so ergo, I have no problem. So let's start talking about scenery. The main stuff I want to talk about is from Warcry. So that's basically this at the back here and everything over here. These are the last two bits of scenery for Warhammer Underworld. I talked about the other rest of the set last time. I did the same stuff here. I opted to use Skeletal Horde again for this because I didn't quite like how just using Sepia Tone worked, which I tested on that. Didn't look how I wanted it to look. I'm still going to further test it in the future, but this I did fall back on Skeletal Horde. Not much to say about it. It's just Skeletal Horde plus Basilicanum Grey. Super simple on top of a Grey Seer base coat, but it'll liven up the games of Underworld. It'll make them look a little bit nicer if the impassable hexes are at least detailed. And this is just kind of like plumes of volcanic ash, smoke coming out the ground, surrounded by various skeletons. That was a Yandin Yellow, Gryph-hound Orange, and the whatever the Soulblight Grey, I think it is, the white wash that Citadel do over that, and then some non-oil as well. So that is that done. Now then, the main event. Basic shading for what we have here, which are actually walkways for Warcry Catacombs. I was actually able to track down a copy of it. I very nearly went in on Catacombs. I think I already told this story. I very nearly went in on Warcry when the Catacombs box was released by Games Workshop however many years ago now, 2019 I think, 2020, because I was like, those are pretty cool looking models, unlike most of the Warcry models, which I wasn't a fan of. The scenery looks great, the board looks great. It's neat that there's these like flimsy bridges and reinforced bridges, but there's a chance when you walk on any of them they'll just collapse and instantly kill someone. Like, that's dumb but fun. So I very nearly went in on it then, but I don't remember why I didn't. I think I just I talked myself out of it at the last minute by maybe like watching some gameplay and being like, I don't know if that's my bag. But either way, these are all based in Grey Seer. These are all not. So these were just Grey Seer, and then this was Snakebite Leather with Skeletal Horde to pick up to pick up the bones and things on the flimsy bridges. Nothing much to say about them. I would have done them this way no matter what. Same with the harder reinforced bridges, to be honest. These are spray painted silver, and then I did use Nazrite Yellow to pick out, because I don't really have a good bronze colour. A bronze colour would have worked better, but I didn't have a bronze. So, or copper, you know, either. Not gold, but I had to use Nazrite because I didn't really have another option, with some Agras Earthshade on top. I also mixed in some Rattling Grime on top of the silver inside the inner layers, just to add a bit more definition. Again, super simple. After you bung on the Agras Earthshade, it looks neat, and I think again from a distance that looks okay, and I wouldn't have done that any different. I didn't paint the underside of these. I wouldn't have done that any different. What changes is when we get to these kind of things, these things here, because if I'm being honest with myself, if they were sitting waiting to get done, they'd sit for probably literally years. Then eventually I'd be like, I really should get those done, spray them in Grey Seer, and then just slap on way too much Basilicanum Grey, or, yeah, it would have been Basilicanum Grey. Basilicanum Grey, the wood would have been done the same way as just like what I talked about, because I didn't do anything different for those. And it wouldn't look great, but it would be done, and it'd be like, hey, at least I did it. But I wanted to do it faster, and I wanted to do it better. So I decided to try a method that you can look up online. There's quite a few tutorial videos about how to do, and picture tutorials about how to do Zenithal shading. But essentially it is, you apply a flat coat of just straight onto the plastic. Then when you do the next coat, you stand a little bit away, you angle it at such a way where you want the artificial, like where you imagine the sun shining down on the model. You stand about 6 inches away and you spray from that distance, so you hit the model at an angle. The top part gets fully coated, the middle part gets partially coated, the underside basically doesn't get coated at all, and that kind of creates an artificial darkness. I haven't tried it yet, but apparently the most common thing to do is spray paint a model black and then white at an angle, and that apparently works really well with contrast paint. The downside to doing that on miniatures as opposed to big scenery is that if you do it on a miniature, granted nobody's really going to be seeing it from these angles, but if you were to kind of turn it upside down you would just see like pure black, because you're not getting any light in there and the paint isn't going to be able to do anything about the pure black either. So I'm not 100% sure about doing it on models, but as far as scenery goes, I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I'm going to double check the color names so I can give you the exact color names I use, because it isn't exactly what Games Workshop used, but it does very closely match up to the official paint job for the original Warcry release, which had quite a few of these that were kind of this color. Warcry comes with like half of these that were in the original set, and then a bunch of the drawbridges and doors, which I haven't touched yet. So I believe it was Rust-Oleum brand, Rust something brand, and Cardinal Red was the colour I base coated them in, which you can sort of see, if I can find one of these where, yeah, that's, you can kind of see the red there. It applies as a really strong red, but it does kind of dull down as it dries. It's probably a little too red. If you want it to be ideal, you want a little bit more brown in there, but it worked for the look I was going for. So I base coated all these in that, and then I used, what was it called? It's something Satin, Turquoise Satin, I believe is what it was called. If it isn't what it was called, I'll flash it up on the screen right now, but I think it was called Turquoise Satin. And just sprayed that at an angle and tried for the first time ever to do the Zenithal kind of appearance. Then afterwards I took the other contrast base coat, not Grey Seer, the other one, it's called Wraithbone, I think it is. Yeah, I think it's Wraithbone. And did a dry brushing of that just to highlight the edges a little bit, and it makes a neat effect, and it's super quick. And if there's nothing else to do on it, like if it is just stone like this took like 5 minutes once it was, you know, spray painted, that is. Not even 5 minutes, it was literally just the dry brush on top and boom, it's done. You can technically try and do something with washes if you want to, but in terms of just getting something nice looking super quickly, boom, done. Same with the well, although I did end up picking out some skeletons and some vases, and then also the grating in the middle. That is Balthazar Gold with Aggress Earthshade on top, leaving a little bit of a turquoise poking through to just kind of show rust on it, which is actually kind of a nice effect. This is actually part of the terrain that comes in Catacombs that's meant to be like inside the mountain. I liked it better looking, and it was faster to make it match up to everything else, because I'm not always going to be wanting to use the map that sets the fight underground. Sometimes you're going to be overworld. So there you go. Actually, yeah, there's where that's kind of like how the red looks before you dull it down at all. So it is a very warm red, but it gels really well with the turquoise and becomes something much nicer here. And a little bit of the dry brushing again. And then we've got just a little bit of gibbon scenery, just nonsense. It's a bunch of vases and skulls. I would say I just used Nazrag Yellow for these. Didn't pick it out that well, but it's just a little bit of, you know, it's just a bit of side scenery. It's just for flavour. Same with the fountain, really. I filled it with slime. The slime kind of separated a little bit, which is the downside to using these sprays, because it doesn't like paints on top, because it has a little bit of a sealant in it, I believe. I don't know for sure, but that's the impression I got based on it's just kind of like really trying not to let anything go on top of it. So be careful with that. But the main thing I wanted was to get these larger bits of terrain done super easy, and it did that wonderfully to a standard that even if I was focusing on it, trying to take my time just using contrast paint, it would never look as good as these turned out. They look really nice. The wood on both, as I just mentioned earlier, is snakebite leather, so that's just contrast paint. Didn't even put a wash on because I felt that was enough, but hopefully give you just a nice look of how the Zenithal shading works with a dry brushing of Wraithbone, and then for the metal parts, again, just using Balthazar Gold and Aggress Earthshade in the joints. Not my idea. I'm copying a tutorial that's available on YouTube, and if I can do it when I hate painting scenery, I despise everything to do with it. If I can do it to this standard, you can do it most likely better. So there is nothing stopping you, and it turns out really nice. It looks really great, and highly recommended, especially if you want to get something done. Let me just move this to the side here. If you want something done fast, because it's quick, and the standard it comes out at, considering how quick it is really nice. Yes, obviously if you were more skilled you could do it much slower, add much more detail, but unnecessary if you're just wanting something that looks okay at the tabletop at that kind of distance. It's got a little bit of edge idling. I probably went a bit too OTT there, to be honest, but again, I'm still learning. It's my first time doing this. but the effect as well with the turquoise mixed in, especially on this broken window, it looks really nice. So that is more scenery than I've ever painted in 1 week. Well, over 2 weeks, but honestly I did all these bits in 1 week than I'd ever painted ever, and it turned out nice. And there's still a couple of big bits to go. They're going to need a little bit more work because they have more wooden parts that I need to rebase. The tutorial I watched did these first and then just used masking tape. I decided to base coat and then just do them afterwards. I don't know if that's faster, probably not, but it's just because I didn't have any masking tape, so that's why I did it that way. So that is it for this week. I don't know how long this ended up being. It was probably a little bit shorter because I didn't have as much to talk about, but man discovers Zenithal painting for the first time and enjoys it is the gist of what this was this time. I am going to experiment more with it because for the doors, I want to try, well, not for some of the doors, there was some other bit of scenery. I want to try doing a Zenithal type shading with grey, and I'm not sure if that's going to work. Because white on black, black on white, yeah, that'll work. But mixing in a grey, I don't think it'll work, but I'm going to try it because I'm really curious about it. And I think it might be a good way to do some scenery that's meant for just the underground. Like, kind of, I should have done it on this, but I wasn't thinking at the time, and I like that this matches up to this. But there is some scenery where it's like an array of weapons against a dungeon wall, for instance. I feel like that should be more grayscale than, you know, outside colours like this. So I'm going to test that at some point. It's probably going to be an abstract failure, but at least it will give me something to talk about next time. Speaking of which, you'll probably see some Resident Evil sharks, or a shark from Resident Evil next time. Definitely some scenery, as I say, because I'm still getting through the box as fast as possible. And probably some more Warhammer stuff, be it Underworlds or Warcry. I'm just doing what I feel like when I do it. Anyway, that is going to do it for this time. I hope this inspires you to get some painting done, and if you decide to try this style of, you know, doing big bits of scenery real quick, look up tutorials. There's tons of picture-by-picture tutorials with lots of descriptions and recommendations if you don't want to use Army Painter, if you don't want to use Games Workshop. They recommend other paints. As I say, I didn't even use any. I'm pretty sure it's called Rust-Oleum, the brand I use, or it's something similar, because that's an import brand, and there's another brand in the UK that's very similar. I'm blanking on the name right now. You know what? I'm going to go get the name. It's called Genolite Direct to Rust range. That's what I use, which is also why it's probably got some of the sealant in it if it's meant for applying over rust. That's what I used to get this effect. It was called Turquoise Satin, so I remembered something for once. But that's going to wrap this up. See you again in roughly 2 weeks to talk about whatever else I've been getting up to. Get your own stuff painted. Doesn't matter if you're good at it or not, as long as you enjoy it. Enjoy the rest of your day on that note, and see you next time. Start for now.